Mighty and glorious according to the mournful rank. Good morning, good morning. Well, the cycle of violence and escalation continues, the war goes on, and there's no sign of peace yet, although there's one nuance. I recommend watching the video until the end, it's mentioned there. In short, Moscow has made a statement about striking decision-making centers in Ukraine, which, according to Moscow, will be targeted on a massive scale. This was stated by representatives of the Kremlin. Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, also advised the so-called European leaders to leave those very decision-making centers and not to be nearby because it could be dangerous. On the Ukrainian side, in turn, they state that the large-scale program of attacks on oil refineries and in general on Moscow's energy infrastructure will continue. In addition, it seems that a counter-offensive is beginning. We will talk about this today as well. And in addition, Ukrainians are also going to be expelled, deported from European countries. Well, but this is not panic. It's really a program, let's say, to relocate some Ukrainians who are not behaving very well back to Ukraine, where, according to European partners, again, the same Ukraine, they can be useful for different things, for the economy, for the front, and for whatever else they might be useful for. But also, look at what Moscow is saying from the very beginning. Here it is stated that the Russian armed forces will strike decision-making centers in Ukraine in response to the strikes by the armed forces, in particular on the training building and the college dormitory in Starobelsk. And they say the attacks by Ukrainian drones happened on the night of May 22. He says the following: all of this was the last straw. Under the current circumstances, the armed forces of the Russian Federation are beginning to systematically strike Ukrainian defense industry enterprises in Kiev, including specific locations for design, production, and programming. In short, all of that. Drones, and in the center there will be other strikes as well, targeting decision-making centers and command posts. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation has urged foreign citizens, including DNPS personnel and representatives of international organizations, to leave Kiev as soon as possible. And ordinary people were advised not to be near those decision-making centers. Next, Lavrov told Rubio in a phone conversation that the Russian army is beginning systematic strikes on targets in Kiev that Moscow considers connected to the armed forces of Ukraine. According to Lavrov, he officially informed the American side that the Russian army is starting strikes on facilities in Kiev that are allegedly used for the needs of the armed forces of Ukraine, as well as on the relevant decision-making centers. He informed the American side that the Russian armed forces are beginning systematic strikes on targets in Kiev which are being used, basically repeating what was already said. But here the repetition is already for the Americans, not just for European or Ukrainian citizens who are being asked to stay away. As for that very decision-making center, I will most likely make another video about all of this. But initially, the strike on it happened because of a mistake by Ukrainian intelligence agencies, who mistakenly thought this dormitory was a place where military personnel lived. Here, Meduza conducted an investigation. By the way, Meduza is a more pro-Ukrainian outlet than pro-Russian. In fact, it is an absolutely pro-Ukrainian outlet. And even here, they cautiously talk about this mistake. It is said that on the night of May 22nd, the armed forces of Ukraine struck the city of Starobelsk in the annexed Luhansk region. And because of a drone, several drones, 21 people died under the rubble. Well, you have to understand, these are young people, aged from 18 to 21 years old. This is exactly what led to this very retaliation against Ukraine. Russia accuses Ukraine of a deliberate attack. And this has already been stated at the UN. It was announced on official Russian channels. It is said that at the time of the attack, about 80 students were in the dormitory of the Starobelsk College of the Luhansk State Pedagogical University. The building was partially destroyed. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian side stated that the target of the strikes on Starobelsk was one of the headquarters of the Rubicon unit, the main organization of the Ministry of Defense for Adaptation and Application. In short, it's also some kind of drone headquarters. But one of the foreign journalists whom the Russian authorities brought to Starobelsk on May 25 said that typical teenage belongings could indeed be seen in the destroyed building. And with this journalist, it's unclear who they are, what their background is, or who was brought there. Nevertheless, this information has been reported. He says that there is no doubt that it was students who lived there. The rescuers described in detail how they pulled young people out from under the rubble. And the Meduza interviewee did not see any signs of military presence in the building at all. Then several more buildings were destroyed, including the building of the Starobelsk Vocational College. This is the building next to the dormitory of the pedagogical college. The journalist was not able to get access there. He was only given access to this one. Then they showed the wreckage, drone wreckage with text in Ukrainian, and also some additional information. Then, in Ukrainian blogs and Telegram channels, there was a document supposedly issued by the director of a vocational college. The previous was a pedagogical college. This one is vocational that journalists didn't get into. An order dated January 26, in which the director of this college instructs to find places in the dormitory to accommodate military personnel from the 80th and 88th units. Motorized Rifle Brigade. One of the versions is signed by Barkov and the other by Baranov, but on social media people say that most likely this order was fabricated. Honestly, I'm not much of an expert in Photoshop and things like that, so if any of you are, please share your authoritative opinion in the comments. As of May 25th, Medusa journalists have no information that the dormitory of the vocational rather than the pedagogical college was damaged at all in the strike. So the pedagogical college was bombed. 21 out of 80 people died there. The vocational one? It's unclear what happened to it. Well, there are also various other issues. In the end, the journalist's assumption is as follows. The strike on the dormitory happened as a result of an intelligence error. This is the most common reason for precision munitions hitting civilian targets in modern wars. So, that's how it is. A small mistake by a single intelligence officer caused a huge problem. And as a result, innocent teenagers died. Well, not teenagers, they were already 18 to 21 years old, but still people who were just starting out in life. Then next, after Starobelsk, we have something else. Here, it turns out that Zelensky says there is a chance to end the active phase of the war. And he said this at a meeting with the Servant of the People faction, which everyone likes so much now that we can barely contain ourselves. The MPs discussed with the head of state the end of the active phase of the war, peace negotiations, and Ukraine's membership in the EU. By the way, we'll talk about that now as well. I've already made a video about how the EU doesn't accept us. They want to take us in as something like, well, not even a younger brother, but more like letting us sit on a little chair somewhere near the table where the high-ranking officials are having lunch. Some lords, mayors, and so on. Zelensky doesn't agree with this and says we're protecting you. So give us membership in that very European Union. In short, the Ukrainian president admitted that he is making great efforts to prevent negotiations about Ukraine without Ukraine, but he acknowledged that unfortunately such a track does exist. That is, well, it means that the US is probably talking with Russia, Europe, I don't know, but maybe there are already representatives of different countries' governments who also want peace, which is something we all need. And they're talking about this without Zelensky's involvement because it's clear that Zelensky doesn't really want to negotiate for peace. It is said that the lion's share of the time was devoted to the prospect of ending the hot phase of the war. And Zelensky noted that by November, the possibility of ending the hot phase is being considered, provided that security guarantees are given. Zelensky says Ukraine currently has an advantage on the front, and the main goal is to prevent Russia from using a pause to deceive and restart hostilities. Well, as far as one can understand, these very security guarantees are exactly joining the European Union, joining NATO, joining the Intergalactic Alliance. There are also all sorts of eager and lustful people. Other guarantees. I don't know where you can get them. And even if Zelensky manages to get Ukraine into the European Union, I will be deeply surprised if that happens. That would mean the beginning of the end of the European Union, primarily for economic reasons, not even political ones. Still, that doesn't guarantee that the war won't spread further. And I don't really understand what would stop the Russian Federation from starting a new war if it comes to that. Nevertheless, all of this is called security guarantees, and earlier Zelensky hoped that Ukraine would be accepted into NATO, but NATO will not accept it. More likely, NATO will fall apart because there are all the prerequisites for this. Some countries that are part of NATO are already saying that they want to leave the North Atlantic Alliance. The North Atlantic Alliance is still resisting. Rutte is doing his best to say that Trump is great, that NATO exists thanks to the efforts of Trump himself. And so far, no one is leaving, but once it starts, the rest follows. I think if some country leaves, even if it's not a very powerful country, everything will start to collapse like a house of cards. Nevertheless, well, we'll see. For now, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. If the war suddenly ends, then naturally, most Ukrainians who haven't managed to get a residence permit, permanent residency, or especially citizenship will be expelled from the European Union. Or at least get a good job, or any job by learning the language up to A2 or B1 level, depending on what's required in different countries. Even now, it's being reported that Ukrainians are being deported from the EU more often, and those who violate immigration laws are the first to be sent back. Most often, these are people who crossed the border illegally, didn't get their documents in order, or committed an offense. Again, not all countries are involved in this, but most likely it's about Poland. This was reported by the representative of the State Migration Service, Natalia Numenko, in an interview with Glavcom. According to her, since 2024, EU countries have been gradually using the readmission mechanism more actively. It provides for the entirely legal return of citizens who are illegally staying in the territory of another state. So, it's not correct to say that tens of thousands of Ukrainians are being deported from there, of course. But individual citizens who are caught doing something wrong somewhere, again, you need to understand that these are not some kind of police raids to find illegal immigrants. No. This person, for example, got drunk, got into a fight, as they say, broke a little tree. It's embarrassing to look people in the eye. Well, here, if you get caught by the police, they check your documents. Your documents are expired. Welcome back to your home country. That's probably how it works. Because there are no other ways to detect illegal immigrants yet. Some kind of card databases and such, that's all a matter for the distant future if it ever happens. EU countries are sending Ukrainian citizens back as violators of migration laws. This especially applies to those citizens who cross the border illegally. Now, Menko clarified that this is not only about people who entered the EU through tissue. They are sending back even those who did not complete their residence paperwork on time or committed an offense. After that, the EU country reduced their period of stay. Now, Menko also noted many requests from European countries, especially Poland, the Czech Republic, and Germany, about the return of men. And women as well, by the way. There were a bit more Ukrainians entering Ukraine in January to April, about 100,000 or so. Well, actually, to be precise, it wasn't even 100,000 more, it was just 18,000 more. Well, that's not a lot, but still, now there's an uproar and people are saying, look, Ukrainians are coming back. Look, Ukrainians want to serve their homeland, but in reality, most likely those returning are, I'm sure, women with children who couldn't settle in a new place. Some countries are extremely difficult to adapt to. Take Norway, for example. Just try learning Norwegian, and Hungarian is even harder. When I listened to those Hungarians, it was just crazy. I couldn't even repeat good afternoon after them. It's not a language, it's like Chinese. But people who really want to, of course, learn all of this. Those who don't want to, or for some reason can't, will probably be the first ones to be sent away. At least that's what they're saying right now. And, for example, as evidence of this, they say that the Czech Republic is introducing stricter rules for Ukrainians with temporary protection. The Czech government has adopted new changes to the country's legislation, and it provides for stricter conditions for the stay of refugees from Ukraine. This amendment will be considered in Parliament. If it is supported, then starting from January 1, 2027, that is, literally in half a year, all of this will be implemented. It is specifically noted that the new measures will not affect those who comply with the law, but will be aimed at preventing abuse and illegal migration. So that's the situation with this illegal migration. For now, you shouldn't listen to those who talk about mass deportations involving thousands of people. No, we're talking about hundreds, maybe thousands across the entire European Union over the course of a couple of months. But this is by no means some kind of mass phenomenon. Well, now let's move from boring statistics to our cheerful public servants and others. In general, everyone who dedicates their time to serving themselves. Naturally, not us. We are not needed by anyone. We are not considered valuable. And this is already confirmed by the very first viewers, the so-called talking heads. So here we have the first indicator for the fourth one. Against the background of some kind of black thing, again, it doesn't look like a military one. But he says that we are calming them down here, rounding their citizens up in vans and forcing them to fight. Nothing serious.
Now, in the unit, these are actually the men rounded up in vans. If so, do they understand where they've ended up? Do they change their minds compared to what they thought in the rear when they were being asked?
Voluntarily or forcibly, these centers invite people to provide their information. They invite people to provide their information.
Yes, yes, yes. Collecting information, yes.
We'll explain as much as we can. That's why you're here.
Go over there to the tree line and learn.
To master certain tools, to gain knowledge, we give time. She's still going through an adaptation period.
Who is going through it? Why? Well, basically, all these talking heads are saying pretty much the same thing. Next up, we suddenly have Lapton. He just got back from Italy. He was on vacation. Look how tanned he is. There, he was talking about how Europe is an unafraid country where, you see, there is no war. He didn't like that. And then there's the judge's son, who was discharged for some reason of his own and goes around everywhere telling everyone what a veteran he is. Now, everywhere, at every turn, he just says that others are draft dodgers. They're all draft dodgers. Although, well, take a person, for example. Yes, he was discharged, but he can still serve in the army. What do those talking heads say nowadays? You don't have to be a salt soldier. You can join the army and take a position as an economist or an accountant. There you go, that's it. Or some other position. I don't know, maybe a spokesperson for some unit, but no, he prefers to go around studios, travel to Italy, buy expensive motorcycles, and earn money. Earned, of course, officially from the war. Let me remind you, a soldier there gets a salary of 20,000 and those who are on the front line get even more. Go ahead and try to prove you're on the front line. Not everyone is allowed to get such a big salary. And even if you do get a big salary, the commanding officer might say, listen, buddy, if you want to stay alive, share your salary with me and I'll donate it, for example, to one of Sternenko's fundraisers. These are the kinds of stories going around. And I didn't make this up. I have a lot of acquaintances who tell me all this. Well, let's listen to Laptin.
It's all just a show. What kind of truce is this?
That's why, of course, a demobilized tanned character doesn't need any truce. He can go around studios, get paid for interviews. Well, life is good. Everything is great. I wanted to say social mobility, but no, he was already born with, what's it called, a silver spoon in his mouth. The judge's son. Well, just imagine, life was good from the very beginning, but then things also went a little bit off.
Guys, we need to listen less to what they tell us about a quick peace.
Nothing like that. Yeah, of course. We need to prepare our children and our families for war. I don't know whether Lapton even has a family. If he does, most likely they're abroad. But I have a feeling he doesn't even have one.
We need to gather our willpower. That's true. We need to think about how to survive during the war.
Well, it's easy to survive in studios. That journalist, I think, completely agrees. You can easily survive in a studio. You won't die there. You will die.
We need to consider how to get through this war, even with this government. That's true.
Or we can still make it to a restaurant. That's not bad either. Yes, that's true, that's true. Lapton and I completely agree. There's another hero of that sort. That's Miroshnichenko, a deputy, by the way, who fled to America in 2022. He hasn't appeared in Ukraine since then. And now he has a young Lenin look, though with a different hairstyle. He's in the process of transforming into a young Elton John. I've already shown you the picture. He's conducting an interview. By the way, Miroshnichenko is another hero of Maidan. And this hero transformer is talking about all sorts of things. To us,
we must do our own thing and defend what's ours.
We worked, me and the tractor.
Independence. We have a reason why we must defend ourselves, why we must win this war.
Why? What's happening?
Sadly, the United States is not our ally today. Both the citizens of the United States and the European Union, which is mostly led by reasonable people today, could be helping more.
It is powerful enough today.
Well, they say that the US is not an ally today. If I were in the place of those migration authorities, I would find out what's going on there. Why does Melnik call the US not an ally? Why is he rebelling against a great country? We still have some figures, well, for example, this military guy. I don't know how he moves around the trenches. This is our deputy, Olienko, who boldly acts like a brave fighter, showing off on the front line as a comrade in arms. Who he really is, you can decide. And he says that Ukraine should be given everything, weapons, nukes, and something else too, as long as Deputy Olienko lives well.
What should the world's reaction be, and what is it now in your opinion?
Look how scratched up he is, how exhausted by the war. With a negative degree of exhaustion on his face, with disheveled, again, negatively affected hair. A guy fresh out of a barbershop is about to start telling us what kind of weapons Ukraine needs to bite into the enemy. I think
It should have happened long ago. Ukraine should get all possible weapons, including nuclear, to defend itself. It would radically change everything, but that's in an ideal world.
I can imagine what would happen if people like that were given nuclear weapons. It would be a global catastrophe, plain and simple. I think it would lead to nuclear weapons being traded and given to third parties somehow, supposedly in Ukraine's interests. In other words, it would spread instantly in all directions and soon everyone would have those portable little suitcases, probably even being sold on AliExpress before long. So there's one big nuclear suitcase with Trump, with Macron, with Putin. And these will be portable little suitcases for anyone who wants to use small nuclear charges, sold both wholesale and retail. I think that's how it would be. Well, that's all from me. Subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to do that. Bye, everyone.
Well, of course, that's how it is, and we have to understand that. And basically, there's only one solution: to finish off the Russian Federation. What other options do we have? I don't see any.
No, and I don't see any either.
I want to carry your jar and live this way, watching the Russian Federation. It's clear they must be destroyed. Please.
I agree with you. Thank you for the inspiring, let's call it inspiring conversation. Sergei Brachuk.